Welcome to Changing Tracks, the program where each week we have a new passenger aboard the train to tell us about their conversion story. Today we have Sister Karen from Ireland. Welcome, Sister Karen.
Thank you.
If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from in Ireland, what you were like growing up, your family life.
Okay. Well, my name is Sister Karen. As you said, I'm from Ireland, from the west of Ireland, a town called S.H.M, County Galway. I grew up in Sligo, which is in the northwest of Ireland. And I think the very beautiful countryside. I mean, anyone who's been to Ireland knows the rolling hills and the mountains and the waterfalls and everything. A very kind of rugged landscape. And I think for me that had a lot of influence as well on my character growing up. Ireland is famous for art, for theatre, literature, and I suppose in that sense, like for me, I always had a great love of art. So growing up in this environment, you know, kind of stimulated my artistic sensibility. Having that sensibility as a child, I was, I suppose, a bit of a nightmare. Growing up, well, we were typical, as I say, young people at the time. We used to, you know, kill each other. No, we didn't kill each other, but boys and girls, like, yeah. I remember we used to, no, we got on great. But like, for example, like I was saying with the art and that, when growing up, I used to paint on the walls, paint on the table, paint on anything I could get my hands on, you know. So, like, I mean, my mother didn't appreciate my skills, you know, but we were healthy, there was a healthy family environment, you know, like my parents loved each other, and as children we felt that as well, you know. There was no, you know, we never, I think, had any worries about, you know, in that sense of, you know, the family. And growing up, as I say, we received a Catholic education from school and as well at home, you know. And as I say, everything went, as I say, more or less the same in regards to the faith. I think when I look back, like, I didn't have a strong faith. Like, I try to remember back, for example, the first communion and that, and I can't remember anything. And the only thing I do remember is I had this purse and I was counting how much money I'd received.
From your first communion.
My financial gains. That was, I think, the only memory I have of my first communion. So there's hope for everybody. And then after that, growing up, I remember, for example, when we were young, I remember my father was big into country music. And I remember he used to play, one of his famous artists at the time was Jimmy Reeves. And there was a song where it spoke about this man who went on his way to Calvary, and that was people threw stones at him and everything along the road, and at the end he died on a cross. And I remember my father said, "Karen, do you know who that's about?" And I was there, "No." And he made me listen to it 2 or 3 times. He said, "Do you know who it's about?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It's about Jesus." You know, so, and I remember my mother as well. I remember when I don't know how old I would have been, but I remember one Good Friday, my mother took me into bed, and she said, she used to always say your prayers, but she said, "Today Jesus died," you know. And I remember when she left and that she turned out the light, you know, I was lying there, I was thinking, Jesus died, wow. And I said, but he was only born in December. And I remember counting December, January, February, March, April. I said, wow. But I figured it out. I said, well, if he's God, he probably grows up quicker than we do. So that was my explanation, you know. And I didn't pray because as he was dead, well, I said, I can't pray until Sunday, you know. So I didn't pray Friday or Saturday. But like what I mean to say with that was there was
religious sensibility.
Yeah, you know, and like there was always a picture of the Sacred Heart, like that in all the houses in Ireland at that stage. There was always the Sacred Heart, which is funny because that came up later on, years later in my life as well, if I don't forget to mention it. So as I said, things went along more or less like that, growing up the normal things, you know. But when I was 15, 16, 17, I think I was already beginning to kind of, when one begins to discover the world, and yeah, you know, it's like you know yourself what you want to do, and your parents don't know anything, and you have to discover the world. And you know, I think I launched myself out into the world, you know. But as I say, with the sensibility that I had, it was like a wild horse, if you like, a little bit out of control, you know. And looking for kind of ideals, no? When you're young, you have the ideal of love, you know, the perfect love or the perfect beauty or the perfect, you know, a lot of times, like when you're young, like the perfect beauty is what, having a perfect body or having a perfect face or having a perfect, do you know what I mean? Like in the search for the perfection, no, you kind of
look in the
wrong areas, you know, and you don't discover that, no, there's something higher. Well, that happened to me, the perfect beauty. Do you know what I mean? Like for me, I remember when we used to go to the mountains or to the beach, like for me, I remember like not being able to talk because it was like so profound, the infinite, you know, the sea, so you can't see the end. Where does it end and where did I come from? And all these deep questions began to, you know, kind of come to my mind. But as I couldn't find answers and I was looking in the wrong places, I suppose I started to go way off track, you know. And as I say, no one could tell me what to do because I had it all figured out, you know. So, as I say, that would have been 16, 17, 18, we started getting into, like we had, like at that stage we were big into motorbikes, into rock music and all that kind of stuff, you know. Like I remember we used to go out, I'm coming home at 3 or 4 in the morning on a motorbike, and the driver had been drinking, you know. You look back, you say it's a miracle that we weren't killed, you know. And actually I remember one of the things that, like we were around 17 or 18 at the time, we were out one night and the following morning they told me that one of our friends that had been with us the night before was dead because he went with another friend to drop off the girlfriend in her house, and while his friend was dropping off the girlfriend he vomited and he choked in his own vomit, which was a wonderful way to die, no? You know, and I suppose that made us think as well, you know, what kind of a life, you know, because that was it, like the only interest was the weekend, and as I say, you know, this, like the party and it was funny because it was like we got into drink and all of that, but it was like a way of escaping from all these profound questions, no? Because, and actually it's funny because when I was younger, like I used to hear this voice that used to say, don't do this or don't do that, or why don't you do this, or, you know, and like I remember thinking, like, I'm not, you know, I'm out of my mind, you know, because my friends didn't think like that at all. And actually I remember, like, even the way we used to dress, do you know what I mean, like, to be able to dress like that, you know, like I remember I had this long coat that I used to wear until I had a drink or two because I felt super uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean? When I had 2 or 3 drinks and I felt a bit more relaxed, you know what I mean, where I could, act out this role, no, where I had some drink to kind of make me feel a little bit, what would you say, you know, with the courage to, but it was like acting out a role, no, and as everybody did it, well, I had to do the same. But for me, it was like totally going against my nature to act like that or to do those things or to, you know, live that style of life, you know. But as I said, the danger with that is, okay, you begin in that way, but you go with the role, then afterwards the conscience begins to darken, you know, and that voice that at the beginning held you back a little, no, and was kind of, begins to kind of, you know, it's you don't perceive it, no, as much as you did before. And as I say, I went way off track, like I went way off track. And like when I was, I suppose, 20 years old, humanly speaking, like I would say I hit like rock bottom, like I was, you know, really far away from the church. I think as far away as you could be from the church, you know, as a person, on self-destruct, because as I had kind of gotten myself into this dead end, you know, I blamed everybody else for it. And of course, the person who had the first, you know, who received the most, what would you say, the one that I blame most of all for the situation was God, you know. I said, well, how could you permit this happen to me if you're a God of love? And which was a hypocrisy because it was like God who was trying to tell me to take it easy, but I knew what I had to do, and I, you know.
Why do you think you would blame it on God?
I think it's strange, but I think because, like, for me, like I grew up with God, do you know what I mean? Like in my family, God was always there, you know, so, and that voice was always there, you know what I mean? And he was always with me, so it's funny, but like even when you see in the family, when something happens, it's usually the people that we love the most that we hurt, because there's a stronger union or more trust or something. And like usually where there's a greater suffering, usually it's the person that's always with you that receives the brunt of the, you know, the anxiety or the whatever. And I think that's what happened. Like for me, God was always with me, and like I blamed him for everything, you know. For me it was God's fault. Everything was God's fault, you know. You know, the typical questions, why did you create me? I didn't ask you to create me, and why did you let this happen to me? And I blamed him for everything, you know. So my attitude was, right, okay, I don't need you for anything. And from there on, my motto in life was, I shall not serve nor God nor man. Total feminist, you know. For me it was, no way, I don't know about anything. But as I say, I was, as a person, I was on self-destruct, do you know what I mean?
And were you happy during this time, or was it, like, were you aware that you were unhappy, or was it
I was aware that I was unhappy, because the only time, and it's funny, like, I was aware that I was unhappy because when I was sober, like, I was, like, going around in my head saying, you know, what am I doing with my life? And I remember the sense of kind of seeing happiness or finding moments of happiness, and that it escapes from your hands, and you're saying, but and you know that you can't hold on to it. And I remember thinking, why is it that I can't be happy? Why does this happiness have to disappear? Do you know what I mean? That, like, this sense of fleetingness, know that everything passes, you know. And I said, why does it have to be like that? That was in one sense. But then, as I say, it's funny because, like, how many times then do people get into, like, drugs or drink or all that kind of thing, thinking that you escape from it? And on the contrary, I remember when I used to have a drink, on the contrary, all of that used to come out, multiplied. Do you know what I mean? You know, in the sense of harshness, no, like as a person, a coldness, and a very calculating, and like despise the others. Do you know what I mean? Like a way of despising the others. That, you know, that was my way of saying, well, like, I don't need anybody. You know, and you know. So I think, like I knew I wasn't happy. It was, you know, it was obvious I wasn't happy. And then at night, how many times do you go to bed and you cry? You're by yourself and you're there, and do you know what I mean? Nobody sees that, but.
So did you continue with the art during this time?
At this stage, no. At this stage, I left the art. I left school. Well, I finished school with the high school when I was 16. I think I finished when I was 16. So that was very young. That was very young to be all of a sudden out in the world. Right. And so at this stage, as I say, I would finish school, and I didn't go back to university until I was 20. You know, so at this stage I wasn't doing anything. Like, I was working, because my only interest was in make a bit of money so that I could have my independence. And like at that stage, as I said before, we were into the motorbikes, we were into the cars. So to be able to have money to afford that style of life, you know, I had to work. Things went on like that for a little while, and I suppose the change came about when my mother invited me to go on a retreat. And in that retreat I had an experience of our Lord. I remember I was the only young person there. As I say, as it was my mother that invited me, everybody was 60 or over. And I remember one night there was exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. As I say, I had no faith in anything. For me, that didn't mean anything at all, but I had to be there. And I remember the priest invited us to come up before the Blessed Sacrament and ask for any healing that we might need, you know. And I remember as he was talking, like, my heart began to beat really strong. And, you know, I said, what's going on with me? Because I said, I don't need healing for anything. You know, for me it was a story, like all of that was, you know, so I said, what's wrong with me? But when I stood up, I remember in front of the Blessed Sacrament, I remember I had my head down. I was looking down. And I just remember hearing, like, don't fight anymore, don't fight anymore. And I remember just looking up, and the only way to explain it is as if my soul was before the Lord. That, like, I haven't seen the Lord with my physical eyes, but I know that my soul has seen him. And it's like I saw everything that I did my whole life long, all the things that I had in the back of my conscience now that I had kind of forgotten about. It was like all of a sudden I saw everything. It was like these floodgates opened, and it was like seeing like a little bit here like the screen, no? Like seeing everything but super fast. You know, I don't know how to explain it. And I remember feeling a pain, like where I felt I was going to collapse with the, and I realised it wasn't a healing that I needed for the pain that, for a hurt that someone had done to me, but for what I had done to the Lord. And even in the middle of this pain, I remember feeling a love that in this world doesn't exist, you know. And for me, in that moment, I had to belong to Him. All of a sudden, it was Him. It, you know, it wasn't the God, you know, that it was Him. It was Him, a personal Him, you know. And like I fell head over heels in love at that moment, you know. And when I got back home, I said, look, I have to go to a convent. I have to give my life to Him. I have to be with Him. I have to, you know. And everybody, like my friends who knew me and that, said, you know, take it easy. Think about it. Are you sure? You know, you're a little bit impulsive. At that stage, I was back in university because I went back to study art again afterwards. I was in my final year of art, and I was ready to leave it all. Like I'd found like the love of my life. I was like, that's it. Like I had to. But as I say, my teachers and my parents encouraged me, look, take it easy, and if it's a true calling at the end of the year, we'll look for your place, and that's it. So I, as I say, continued on. Met someone.
Typical.
And thought, well, maybe it's marriage. Wow, it must be marriage. It's after all, it's not the vocation. So, you know, I began to go out with this person, but as no. I remember feeling like an infidelity. No, this isn't it. And I said, look, no, that's it. We have to, you know, it didn't last long because, like, for me, like I had this thing inside of, you know, and like, you know, it's like to be with the person, all of a sudden you hear the other saying, oh, but you don't know what he's like, you know, he's so, you know, like I'm sure he thought like that she's lost it, you know, she's, you know, but as I say, it didn't last long. So I remember calling a woman that I know in Ireland, and I said, look, I don't know what God wants from me. She said, well, look, come out to the house because there's some priests here from Spain, from a Spanish institution. Come out and meet them and see, you know, they seem to be very nice. So I went out to meet them, and when I saw them, I said, I think this is it, you know, because they were brothers, but there was a female branch as well, the servant sisters. So they invited me to come to Spain to meet the sisters. So within 2 weeks, I was in Spain, you know, I met the sisters and I was in Spain. And everything from there, I think, went super fast because it was like I came to Spain and within 2 weeks I entered as a candidate with the sisters, which is like a postulant. For me, looking back, you know, I remember one day we were praying the rosary, you know, and I was looking back and I said, how is it possible that God could call me to a vocation? Because first of all, I wasn't even living in a state of grace. I wasn't a generous one of these souls that says, well, look, she's very generous, good, you know, good-natured. I think I'd like stingy, full of vice, you know, a disaster. I wasn't even looking for God. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't even saying, at least I'm not aware of it. I don't know. Maybe, as I say, God knows the heart of man. But, you know, and I remember one day, like saying to God, what did you see in me that, you know, you called me to this, or that you made me yours, if you like, in, you know, in a certain sense, because there's people out there that are 100 times better than I am, and God doesn't call them to be, you know, to be his spouse, you know, which is something that I think still, you know, I have to go in depth in, like, what's it, to understand what it is to be the spouse of Christ, you know. But I remember it's like he brought to my mind an image of this retreat that I was at with my mother. And there was one moment when I was, during the day, when I was totally bored. So while they were down in the chapel praying, I went upstairs, and it was a typical monastery with these long halls and the Sacred Heart at the end of the hall and the doors, you know, on each side. So as I was super bored, I went upstairs, and I remember entering into the hallway and seeing the Sacred Heart at the end of the hall. And the only thing that occurred to me was to start running and then slide down the hall. And I slid down the hall until I reached the Sacred Heart, and I looked at him and I started laughing, and then I ran away the opposite direction. And it was like the Lord said to me, you can't provoke me like that. It's running to my arms and then trying to run away, and it was like that I had provoked the Lord, and that he said, you can't do that, you can't provoke me in that way, you know. So I entered, as I say, I came to Spain 2 weeks and I never went back, you know. I came here and I knew it was like God said to me, like, this is what I want for you, you know. And I came and I discovered all of a sudden, I remember one of the things that impressed me most of all was the joy that I saw on everybody's face, you know, this innocence, this joy, this purity, you know, the simplicity of, you know, the simple things that make you laugh, and not the complicated, you know, things in the world are so complicated and you have to put on a face and you have to be so, you know, say so superficial or so, you know, everything was at face value, you know. So for me that was like an eye-opener, and I said, no, this is like definitely, like for me it was like the Lord saying, this is where I want you to be, you know. So as I say, I entered on the 22nd of September 98.
Have you ever regretted saying yes to God in your vocation?
No. Like I was saying before, like when one understands who God is, you know, because how many times we have this idea of a God that's way out there, you know. But when you understand that you're talking about a person, you know, and you're talking about Jesus Christ, you know, and I think when one has an experience of him, I'm going to tell you actually something that happened to me that helped me a lot at the beginnings. When you're not generous with God, okay, and you don't give him what he wants, okay, because God calls, there's different vocations, and maybe God calls someone, they're very young, okay. My vocation I don't know, was he calling me when I was young or not. I know my mother said that I spoke about being a religious at one stage when I was younger, but as I didn't answer the call, I began to live my own life, and I went, as I say, on a different path. But then, through the mercy of God, he brought me back, you know. The only thing about that is many times you have to cry a lot for what you did off track, you know. That's why I'd encourage anyone that's listening not to go down that road, you know, because what God wants is the best, even though it might seem at first glance like, no, I have to renounce this, I have to renounce that. But when you don't do what God wants from you, it's when you choose to follow your own thing and your own, I suppose, your own plan. As I say, one ends up many times, like at the best of times, like you have a lot to cry over afterwards. If not, where maybe you could even reach the point where there's no return. Do you know, in my case, thank God, like I had a return, but sometimes we can get ourselves in situations where there's no way out of it and you're stuck. That's it, like as they say, you've made your bed, well then lie in it, like that's the way it is. Not because of the mercy of God that he does, but because, do you know what I mean? Because you've made decisions that have consequences, and you have to now be responsible for the consequences. But like I say that because I remember when I did enter as a religious, I always had the sense of, oh, you know, why didn't I do it? Why did I have to let so much time go by? Because I entered when I was 25 years old. You know, I had lived a life before that, and I said, look at all the things I did. Do you know what I mean? And all the things that I had there. And I remember always having this kind of experience of being kind of dirty, you know, and like in the eyes of God. And I remember many times I used to go to prayer, and I used to have this kind of, if you like, this kind of a vision, if you like, or like a meditation, if you like, where I used to imagine myself in this huge room where there was a throne and all these beautiful people dressed in white. And beautiful not just because physically they were beautiful, which they were as well, but because of their virtues and their goodness and everything. And I was at the back dressed in rags with cuts and bleeding and, you know, nasty. And like many times I used to reach this point where the king called me forward, and it always ended there, you know. And I remember one day it reached that point where he called me forward, you know. And I remember in this meditation where I felt so dirty, so used, you know, before this God who's purity and goodness and love. And I remember I went forward, and he caught me. I remember he caught me by the hand, and he lifted up my arm, and it was like my arm was full of wounds and full of cuts. And I remember I lowered my head and I said, I was looking for love. That was my response. And I remember in that moment he lifted up his hand and he said, I was too, you know. And for me, like, that helped me to understand that, do you know what I mean, that maybe throughout all the things that I had lived, like that, he saw that I had been behind it all, looking for love, looking for him, but become mistaken, like in the ways that I did it.
Well, thank you, Sister Karen, for sharing your testimony with us. Wow, just like Sister Karen said, the Lord is always looking for our love, always, always. And I think Sister Karen's story is one of an immense mercy, the mercy of God, and how we should never give up hope, no matter how bad things can seem at times, and no matter how off track we seem, that the Lord always, He keeps His gaze on us always, like when she was running down the hallway and laughing at the image of the Sacred Heart, and He said, "You can't provoke me," and He's always there watching us, even when we don't realize it. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you on the next program with our next passenger.